leaking this information to the press, was for a week at the Office of Rights and Democracy in a position as a senior advisor. We don't know what his mandate was, how much he was paid. The contract was given to him by a fellow board member, acting president Jacques Gauthier. And was Mr. Navarro-Jenny perhaps receiving a very generous salary to go through the thousands of emails that the private investigators had discovered in order to find some dirt against me and international board members to leak to the media? Is this a good use of taxpayers' money? We have projects in Haiti, in Afghanistan. We have victims of sexual violence in Congo. And people are trying to go on a witch hunt against me and Dr. Samar. It's astonishing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ray, Mr. Akhavan. We're going to now move to Madame Lalonde for 7 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll be sharing my time with Ms. Deschamps. First, Ms. Trépanier, thank you for coming today. I understand that this is emotional. I also knew Mr. Beauregard, and I had great respect for him. We will be guided by your requests in this committee's work. You can be certain of that. Mr. Akhavan, you have also provided us with a very clear report. Now you're asking that the board be completely restructured so that rights and democracy can once again become what it was. Before asking you to explain this, I'd like to ask you another question. You spoke about these 3 small grants, 2 to Palestinian organizations and 1 to an Israeli organization. And you said that this played a role in the development of this crisis. Now, over the weekend on Radio-Canada, there was a report on the NGO Monitor and its influence in Canada and Quebec. To your knowledge, is there any link between NGO Monitor, any connection between that monitor, any board members, and the positions that were taken on 3 small grants that were provided to 2 Palestinian groups and 1 Israeli group? Thank you, Ms. Lalonde.
Legitimate concerns about the demonization of Israel at the United Nations. And I've worked with the United Nations for 10 years. 80% of the resolutions are against Israel. Sudan, Iran, Myanmar, Zimbabwe, they all escape scrutiny. But I think organizations like NGO Monitor have gone too far. They have gone too far because they're suppressing all dissent. And the chair, Mr. Brown, had unsuccessfully attempted against the opposition of board members to invite Mr. Steinberg to address the board. And we know that one of the first articles that came out after the death of Mr. Beauregard was that of Mr. Steinberg, published in the Jerusalem Post, then in the National Post. He had access to internal documents of the board. The repudiation of these grants by Mr. Matus in his 15-page memorandum is based entirely on reports of NGO Monitor. So the link is clearly there. But I want to share with you what Mr. Yossi Alfer, who's a former advisor to Ehud Barak, the present defense minister of Israel, former director of the Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies at Tel Aviv University, this is what he has to say about NGO Monitor. He says that NGO Monitor seems dead set on eliminating human rights monitoring of Israel entirely and smearing anyone who supports this vital activity. This is a former advisor to Ehud Barak saying this. Within Israel itself, where I have many friends and colleagues, NGO Monitor is seen as a blatantly political far-right organization. And I'm baffled as to how this organization can have so much influence over an institution like rights and democracy. I also want to add that some of the representations that have been made, never mind B'Tselem, which is an Israeli organization, the chair says it's Israeli in name only. I mean, this is the language of the far right in Israel. We're basically saying that unless you're blindly obedient, you're a traitor to Israel. But even if we look at Allmand, the organization in Gaza, which incidentally has also issued reports condemning the Palestinian authorities, condemning Hamas, calling for an investigation of Hamas rocket attacks against southern Israel as well, which is not mentioned at all. But it's interesting that in February 13, 2007, because of a lawsuit that was brought against NGO Monitor before the Israeli courts by the Institute for Applied Research in Jerusalem, a defamation libel lawsuit, Mr. Steinberg issued the following retraction, that he said, "I regret having called Al-Mizan an organization that justifies violence." This is Mr. Steinberg as a result of Israeli court proceeding admitting that Al-Mizan does not justify violence. Now, Al-Haq is also interesting. The Israeli courts have never convicted Mr. Shawan Jabarin of terrorism. What they have said is that there is a travel ban against him, and this is what the U.S. State Department country report recently said about this Israeli court decision. This is the United States State Department Human Rights Report for 2009. On March 11, the Israeli High Court barred human rights defender, this is the U.S. State Department calling him a human rights defender, Shawan Jabarin, director of Al-Haq, a Palestinian human rights NGO, from traveling outside the West Bank without holding a hearing. This was an ex parte hearing. There was no chance to contest the evidence. Based on evidence that Jabarin and his lawyer were not allowed to see, the court refused to lift the travel ban imposed on him by military order in 2006. And I just want to end by saying that in a conflict zone, one will always encounter people who have had all sorts of different pasts. Mr. Ariel Sharon was accused by the Kahan Commission in Israel of war crimes in Lebanon, and he became prime minister. Now, the accusation of Shawan Jabarin, who was until 1987 member of the PFLP, is interesting because our own foreign minister, Maxime Bernier, met with Riyad al-Malik, the foreign minister of the Palestinian Authority, in December of 2008, I believe. Well, Mr. al-Malik was a senior member of the PFLP for many years, yet this government pledged to give $300 million to the Palestinian Authority. So the problem here is that there is a legitimate concern about demonization of Israel, one-sided attacks, but I think that NGO Monitor and other organizations have gone too far, and we are more extreme in Canada than people are in Israel. I have a student who's an Israeli Air Force pilot who flew bombing runs over Lebanon. He seems to be more reasonable about these issues.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. We're now going to move back over to the side to Mr. Abbott, 7 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Trépanier, it's very, very difficult for you to have come. I wish to express my sincere condolences for your loss. At a human level, it is far beyond anything that we can be discussing at this table. I thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Akhavan, I want to get to some common ground with you, and so perhaps we could begin with legislation that sets out the rights and democracy. You'd be familiar with Clause 31.1. The chairman shall, within 4 months after the end of each year, transmit to the minister a report of the activities of the Centre for that fiscal year, including financial statements for the Centre and the Auditor General's report thereon. You're familiar with that clause, I'm sure. The other clause that I wanted to draw to your attention was from bylaws, bylaw number 1, paragraph 3. The Board of Directors appointed in accordance with the Act shall establish the policies which determine the activities of the Centre and shall approve the annual budget of the Centre. So we're on the same page.
Yes, of course.
Would it be a stretch if I was one more, Clause 20, as provided by the Act, the President is the Chief Executive Officer of the Centre and shall supervise and direct the work of the Centre this is the important part, in accord with the policies established by the Board. Are you and I in agreement that the Board is in charge or should be in charge of the policies of the Centre? Absolutely, sir, yes. The entire Board, yes. Yes, I understand that. If the Board has the responsibility for establishing the policies and direction of rights and democracy.